I'm only handy to push the buttons, aren't I? There we go.
Murray's disappeared. I think we're good to go. We did have a message on there saying that it was that we got it, that it's being recorded. So maybe.
Yeah, we're ready.
The Zoom recording has not quite started.
Okay.
Oh, we're live. It's not recorded yet.
This is David. You can't mute it here, can you?
Yep.
Well, that is a good point while we're all sitting here waiting anyway, like microphones mute.
Just so you know, you are live now on YouTube.
Oh, okay, righty ho. Okay, so welcome everybody today. Today we have Mark Davies here, Director of Operations of DOC. You all know who Mark is. And we have Mike Legg from the West Coast Taipōtini Conservation Board. And Mike is the chair. And today he's going to be giving us a presentation on the role of the Conservation Board. There you are up there, Mark and Mike. And here we go with the recording in progress. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, Mayor and councillors and CEO Paul. Really appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you. And yes, I've got sitting next to me Mike Legg, our new chair of the West Coast Taipōtini Conservation Board, and I will segue across to Mike in a moment. But I've also got Joy Comrie, our regional DOC statutory manager for the West Coast, sitting in just again because I thought we would be pretty informal. I think we've got 20 or 30 minutes this afternoon, and really we didn't want to go through the presentation because we've shared it with the council, but Mike and I thought we would just do a bit of a sort of a question and answer session. But just before we go into that, I just first of all want to say it's good to be in front of you, and certainly one of the topics that the council have been very interested in over the last, I suppose, year or so has been the High Court action over the Paparoa National Park Management Plan and its derogation from the CMS. The last time I spoke to you, the councillors had a couple of questions around it because of the interest from both the community and especially the business community. And I just want to affirm that the High Court had its hearing. A decision came out in late March. The decision was to strike out the recreational helicopter provisions only from the National Park Management Plan, which we've now done. And it does allow for all other parts of the plan to be implemented. As part of the relief to the High Court and to resolve the derogation issue, which is a planning issue over the, I suppose, the hierarchy of statutory plans, which, you know, councils will be very familiar with in your RMA context. But for us, we need to now do a full review of the CMS, and Mike will talk more about that with you. But Mike, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Mark. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present myself to you today, and I hope we can do this fairly frequently. If the council has any questions or anything in context of how the board works. What I want to say basically is I've done 2 meetings now with the board, and the last one was with the old board members who resigned, who weren't present. So we currently have 3 vacancies, which they're with the Minister of Conservation now to fill. And so once we get those 3 vacancies filled, we will have a full complement of the board. Currently, the board has sufficient members to form a quorum. So I'm not unduly worried about board business at the moment, and we'll take this through as it happens. So the big thing I think really for the board is to get back on its feet and make it more functional in terms of how it interacts with the community at large. And I think, and certainly with Ngati Waiwai and Makathio, we need to establish a new partnership relationship, I think, with those people, which I think is essential for a functional board. I think also that we need to look ahead, and I think previously my understanding is the board's been very introspective. So we need to look ahead and how the board can best serve the community. And I think Mark's mentioned the CMS, and that was, once I found out I was on the board, irrespective of whether I was elected as chair or not, that was one of my priorities. I was previously chair of the board about 3 or so years ago when we did the Paparoa National Park Plan. And it was pretty evident then that CMS needed a serious review. And unfortunately, I left the board before we could get stuck into that. So we have a planning day planned in November, and that will in part be dictated to by what we anticipate will be the letter of expectation from the minister, which comes out every year. And that will give us guidance about what the minister's expectations are for the board. These are individual board letters, so all boards will receive letters that are related to issues which these particular boards have to consider. So top of my priorities at the moment, besides getting the board into a functional unit, is to look at the CMS and how that can best be structured. It needs to be a more fluid document, and it needs to take into account all the issues that, particularly on the West Coast, we need to consider when we're considering any applications or any requirements that we need to do to get the coast functional in terms of conservation and the board's activities. I think the other area which is a major concern to me is we initiated previously the Westland National Park Plan, and that fell by the wayside. And that is another important area that the board needs to consider, and that would probably be my next priority, to look at that again and pick up where we can without necessarily thinking about the CMS. So there are ways that we can actually look at the National Park Plan whilst the CMS is running in parallel. And I think this is really important. We need to get to grips with that plan down there and look at how jobs can be sustained and tourism can be sustained as well as looking at issues related to conservation of the area. So that there will be other areas, and of course everything pops up from now and then. But I think from my point of view, that would be the two highest priorities to date. If the minister has other priorities, obviously we have to take this into consideration. But I would certainly strongly, if the minister asked me, those would be the two immediate priorities I think we need for the region. There are obviously going to be other areas. I think one of the areas I was very keen on the board previously was stewardship land. And I think the board has to start thinking about that, not necessarily to make cast iron decisions on stewardship land, but we need to start thinking about what the whole issue of stewardship land is for the coast. And I know probably most of the councillors will have realised that we have a substantial part of the coast in conservation land. And I think we just need to keep in mind the issues related to stewardship land for that reason. And of course, we're going to have to wait for direction, but it is an area I'd like the board to think about, and not necessarily to actually carve up the West Coast, but just to think about how we can tackle the stewardship land issue. The other thing that I'm looking at currently, and I initiated at the weekend, is that I'm establishing contact with all the South Island conservation boards, and my intention is to visit those boards and re-establish the communications and planning that we have to think about in terms of the boards. The West Coast joins 5 national parks, or has national parks in it, and these are all going to be management plans, which we would have to have some consideration with. Kahurangi, for example, which we have I think we've got the largest chunk of the Kahurangi National Park actually sitting in Bulla. And that management plan was put on hold a while ago. And I think that's something we need to consider because it impacts on recreation. So I think probably that's probably where I see the board at the moment. I think we just need to get the board back into gear. And I've got some really, really good members on the board. And it's great to have Ngāti and Makapio and Ngātahu around the table. I value their input considerably, and we worked in partnership exceptionally well when we did the Paparoa National Park plan, and that's what I want to look forward to now. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Mike. And if I could just sort of reinforce a couple of points to you, Council. I mean, Mike's touched on, especially around the CMS review, and I mean, in a vertical sense, the Taipōtini 1 plan is not connected to the CMS, but in a horizontal sense, I think if we are all looking for better integrated outcomes for the region as a whole, and I think the opportunity of concurrently the Taipōtini 1 plan process progressing over the next year and the CMS review being initiated later this year or early next year, there is just an opportunity to ensure integrated outcomes are achieved, because that's what the community are expecting of us all. As you know, Acting Minister Verrill earlier this year announced the Stewardship Land Review and an independent panel, and certainly Minister Allen is now back in role. She visited the coast last Friday, had the opportunity for a quick catch up with Mike as the new board chair. She just was really heartened to have Mike in that role. And she is certainly wanting to progress the Stewardship Land Review, as you know, and certainly the board will have a role at some point, and it's just great to have, I suppose, Mike in this role and the board being actively participating when the time is right. And so that's all from us, but we're up here for questions.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mike. Councillors, do any of you have any questions?
I have.
Councillor Gibson?
Yep. Can I ask, public perception is these boards are stacked with people that don't really represent our communities. What do you think of that, Mark?
I think the board chair should answer that, Alan.
Or the chair, yeah.
Thanks, Mark. No, in part, I agree with you. That is a public perception. It's a public perception nationally, not just on the coast. But I think probably with our boards, we do have a good spread. And of course, we're waiting for the 3 new members, which at the moment, we don't know who they're going to be. That's with the minister to make the decision. But I'm hoping that those new members would provide a spread for us. Of course, we're always stuck with who applies. So
I thought they were appointed.
They are, but it's a public application process.
Oh, I see.
So
and the other thing I want to ask is, you mentioned all about conservation. Anything to do with regional development or, jobs?
Oh yeah, super. Yeah, great question. Yes, there is, because as part of our planning day, I want to look at put up the proposal that we how the board can actually look at the bioeconomy for the West Coast. And I mean, it's early days, but I have some ideas relating to that. But we have to look at how that best integrates with the planning process, with how councils are planning, and also how the Department of Conservation is planning. But Jobs for Nature has shown that we can provide jobs for conservation. What we now have to take it through, in my opinion, is the next step, and how that might improve the economy of the West Coast in general. And we're going to have to look at changes for our economy on the West Coast for the future, taking into account a whole raft of things. I mean, climate change is one thing, coastal erosion, a whole raft of issues sitting for us on the coast. And so I think probably this is where I see the best place to work, is to work in conjunction with the councils on this, not necessarily for us to be in each other's pockets, but we need to plan and we need to think through things properly, and we always need to think long term for the coast. So yes, jobs are important, and I think the board has to consider these things when we're looking at planning.
Hey, thanks, Michael. I could you've given me time to have a quick think, but I mean, certainly the social and economic well-being of the community is very much at the top of ministers and of course government's mind. But the minister is very clear, and of course the statute requires it, that conservation boards are representing the communities that they serve, and that they're a voice for those communities. And one of the things that I'm really pleased that Mike is reaching out and connecting with councils, because it is so important that councils and the broader community know who are board members and who is the board chair. And certainly in any appointments, that diversity of thought, geographic diversity, and diversity of skills and experience are all attributes the minister takes into account when she makes appointments. But as Mike has said, it's really important that we get good nominations. And there's at least 3 seats around the board table every year that come up for nominations. And the minister will be calling for nominations for next year's round in January. So I would really encourage council to think about that, because it's a real opportunity. The more people who apply, the greater opportunity the minister has to make good appointments.
Thank you. That's good.
Mike and Mark, thank you for your presentation. I'm interested in the CMS. Changing public recreation and other things like that mean the CMS often lags what's reality on the ground. So I'm just wondering, what are the other policies or legislation that affect the framing of the CMS?
Well, overlying the CMS is the general policy, and that also needs to be considered in relation to, just remember that we're not unique. Just about every board in the country has to revise its CMS. So I think the most recent one was about 3 or 4 years ago in Wellington. So this is not unique to the coast. And I think, we led the way with the Paparoa National Park Plan, and it's my intention to try and make sure we lead the way with the CMS. So the general policy statement overlies the CMS, and that's something which would have to be looked at as well, because it essentially sets the scene for the CMS. And so it's almost like a 3-dimensional model, if you like. So the general policy statement's running the CMS is running how boards work, and then the boards have to look at how it functions. I don't think we should be frightened of that. I think we just have to say it's got to be done. And however it's got to be done, we do it, because we need to be functional, and we need to make the CMS flexible. We need to make it an active document that we don't have to keep going back to high courts for to get rulings. And if anyone reads the CMS, if you've got something to put you to sleep at night, you'll see that it's got such minute detail in it that it makes it very difficult to maneuver around these areas. And that's really what caught Paparoa and helicopters. So, it needs to be a flexible document, and it needs to be current, and it needs to be future looking as best as we can do.
And just to support Mike in that, Tim, I mean, certainly the current CMS, which is now running on because its actual life was 2010 to 2020, it actually took about 10 to 15 years to produce. So some of the thinking in it is actually 15 to 25 years old. And it's a mix of sort of strategic, and in some parts it's very prescriptive and a bit like a blueprint. And it's about 400 pages long and has a bit of a rule book. And so, you know, we call that sort of a previous generation. And as Mike has described, the future CMS will be a very strategic, high-level document, which will be looking at regional and place-based. And when I'm talking about place, I'm talking about Kahurangi, Paparoa, Arthur's Pass, South Westland, place-based outcomes, and having that higher level strategic and policy view to allow for decisions to be made a bit more in an agile and flexible and future-focused sort of framework. So I think we really are, I suppose, heartened by the decision that has been made to do a full CMS review, and I think it will serve us well going into the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Just a question. We had a member of the public the other day that lived at Te Kinga. Has there been any progress there with the Jobs for Nature or the pest control that was getting done out there?
I haven't got an update on that. I'm sorry, Mayor. That the Te Kinga project is actually a regional council-led project.
Yes, we thought you just may have been involved there with them.
Yeah, well, I'm in my ops staff in Greymouth, so I'm very happy to take that question to my ops manager and to the regional council and come back to you offline about it.
Thank you, that would be great. Are there any questions there? Councillor Haddock?
Hi, Mark. Mike. It's just reiterating what Councillor Gibson said earlier on, and you know, Department of Conservation are held in high regard on the coast, I believe. Just, you know, talking to public and that, but apart from the iwi representatives, I know the general public perception is they don't hold a lot of credibility on the Conservation Board because of its the way it was weighed by probably the previous minister towards forest and bird type representation. And I believe I know someone that stood several times for that was actually really interested in being on the board but never got accepted, who was a good community person and had lived here, got family here, and really, you know, just I thought would have been, you know, just one of the broad range of sort of people from the community. But just I do hope that Minister Allen, you know, in the applications does get a wider mix, because, you know, we do, one of the things we do need is employment and jobs here, you know, and I think you know, there's opportunities more than just the Jobs for Nature and that. So thank you. Just I hope we do get a good mix across there to join with iwi and that on the board, you know.
Well, I can just, could I just go first, Mike? I mean, Peter, I just need to give you that confidence. The minister's really mindful of that. She's been very close to this board. She met with them in December, or the previous board, she met with them in December of last year. And she has been well briefed over the last 6 or 8 months. Francois is a board member, and he's certainly talked to her about the board. Not wanting to segue to you, Francois, but if you want to jump in at any point. But I do want to say that the 4 new members that the minister appointed in July of this year, and Mike has described them, they're really good, active. They all came from strong nominations from the community. And, you know, Hadley Mills, Mark Malsop, Di Rossiter, and Mike. And there's 3 vacancies now, and the minister's really mindful of that. And as I say, next year in January, the minister will be calling for new nominations. And, you know, it's a real opportunity for the board has to reflect the community of the West Coast.
Absolutely. Yeah, just a comment. All board members, when they come into the boardroom, park whatever organisation they're with outside the door. So I won't tolerate any organisation bringing or trying to influence a board member. So if any board member is a member of any group, they park it before they come in. We represent the community and not individual organisations. And so this is one of the things that I think is really important.
So Francois, I'm not sure if you want to say anything, and you've been sitting around the table a bit for the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, just supporting what you're saying, Mark, and to you, Pete, that we were this time round we were filthy rich for candidates, and obviously we never had enough positions until what's just happened recently. So fortunately, we had a good list for the minister to pick from, and she'll be continuing to look through that list that she had in that first round. So we're really expecting that we'll get some names from that list, and it doesn't matter who they are; they're all really, really good people, Pete. So we'll be comfortable with the names that she selects to replace the 3 that left at our last board meeting, and just supporting Mike's view around. Unfortunately, in the past, they never left their baggage at the door. And brought it through, which was the main reason that we had issues through that 3-year tenure. So with Mike back at the helm now, and the support that both McArthur and Waiwai and Naito will give him, we can make sure that stuff doesn't happen again.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark and Mike. It is now 3:59, so we have to move on to our council meeting, but thank you very much for coming and talking to us today, and thank you, Joy, for your attendance as well.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you.
I can't get my camera to go, Tanya.
Okay, so we need to have a pause anyway. We're just sort of waiting